Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jill, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm going to introduce the project that I'm starting next week, which is called Algorithmic Folklore. So today I will just introduce what an algorithmic folklore is or could be. And the subtitle explains it a little bit. I'm talking about vernacular creativity and automation in everyday contexts. So I'll start by explaining the two words, and then I'll give you some examples. So algorithms actually doesn't mean anything etymologically, except that it refers to the name of this guy, Muhammad al-Khwarizmi, who formalized the idea of an algorithm in mathematics as a sequence of rules that you follow to achieve a goal and calculating something. So if you look at this, which Euclid formulated maybe like 300 BC to calculate the greatest common divisor between two numbers, this is an algorithm. It's just a sequence of rules that you can follow, questions that you can answer yes and no to obtain something. And this representation is a very computer sciencey one, like this is how computers work, but you can also follow this process with your brain. But today, algorithms mean something very different. So this is how Facebook explains their algorithm, quote unquote. They don't really show you any actual algorithm. They just show you a big funnel where data is sucked in, and then some kind of AI models processing it, selecting posts, deciding which post is targeted with advertisement. And they think that they're explaining to you their algorithm, but in fact, there's probably thousands of algorithms behind this kind of abstraction, and you can't really know what they are. So this is to say, we are in what Frank Pasquale calls the black box society, where secret algorithms control everything you do online and also offline increasingly. And I think we can see the relevance of algorithms in stuff like even Netflix episodes that are horror about, I don't know, I think this was a dating app algorithm or something. So algorithms are becoming actual things that we are afraid of, we try to understand, but also we don't really look at the actual mathematical processes. They become something more, something weirder. And this is all to remind you that algorithm is a complex term. And this is important because I'm combining this idea of algorithm with another concept that is folklore. So you might think that folklore is pretty distant from technology. So if I say folklore, probably depending on where you're from, you're thinking about trolls and witches or monsters, fairies, pixies. But folklore is always updated, and it is connected with different kinds of technologies, from writing to reading to copy machines. So when copy machines were introduced in offices, people developed what is called Photocopy Lore or Xerox Lore, and they would just copy stuff, jokes, and they would paste these on their office walls, and this would disseminate pretty much like folk tales did hundreds of years ago, right? And when you think about the web was about making money and setting up websites, but also people made up what is called internet folklore or web lore. Creating websites with fantastical creatures and myths and legends and what you recognize as the GeoCities aesthetics of the 90s or then 2000s and so on. So this, I'm not the one figuring this out. There is an extensive literature on folklore on the internet, or what has been called digital folklore by Olli Lin and Dragan Espenshid. And I'm just adapting this perspective, the theoretical framework, because I think new technologies have their own folklore. And my question is, okay, so what kind of folklore do algorithms have? What is folklore of algorithms? And practically, this is very relevant because this is the interface of Crayon, which is a very simple implementation of DALL-E. And it asks you, what do you want to generate? So you're put front and center as a user. It gives you some examples of realistic or fantastical things you can generate. But when people use these systems, they often make other stuff up. And one example is this, which you might be familiar with. So someone one day just prompted DALL-E Mini, I think, with this word, Krungus. And the word doesn't mean anything in any language. I think it did not exist before. And DALL-E would regularly output this figure. And that person, who became quite popular, was a bit scared about this and started formulating a whole theory about what Krungus was. So he said, I really don't know. I don't like how all these pictures of Krungus are. I made up the word. Why are they all the same man? Is the Krungus real? Have I discovered a secret cryptid? So even in the, this is not a researcher. I don't know who they are, but they are very much a user and an explorer of generative AI models. And they were already framing this phenomenon as something close to folklore, so cryptid. And it didn't take long before the media picked up on this. And the Krungus became much more. It became a creature or a nightmare creature that haunts AI in general, so not a specific model, as usual in this kind of discourse. Krungus became quite popular, and other people started generating their own versions. And it's quite interesting that whenever you mention it in different contexts, that will recur. The figure is always there, meaning that to some extent, the model always generates a monster when this word is presented to it. And several writers recognize this, like James Bridle has written about it in terms of a mythological figure untethered from human experience. So he connects the Krungus to folklore, to mythology, but a mythology that's not human. It's artificial or of machine learning to some extent. And Bruce Sterling has also recently written about AI monsters and recognized that these are very similar to myths. They're modern myths. They are folk stories. And as he says, folk tales catch on because they mean something. So I think this is a very good example of algorithmic folklore as a story that is made by people and machine learning models or algorithms together, that it means something to people mostly. And this is why I define algorithmic folklore as the repertoire of genres and practices resulting from the encounter between vernacular creativity, so everyday creative practices, and automation, or everyday encounters with automated systems. So this is my definition, and in this project I want to explore algorithmic folklore. And since I didn't even start yet, so I really haven't done anything. But what I do have is a draft of a chapter that's coming out in a month, where I sketch out a typology of algorithmic folklore. So I started mapping out what it could be, and I'm just going to give you some examples of it. So I think there are a lot of genres and practices in algorithmic folklore. The first is metaphors and myths. So we all know what a metaphor is, what myth is, but we rarely think about machine learning or computing in terms of myth. Some people do, and they do great work, like Tina Buscher on black boxes. And I think the black box is a great example of a myth, because it's a term that comes, it is a metaphor used to describe something in cybernetics and computer science. And when we look at it, we realize that, in fact, it is a gross oversimplification, and companies use this idea of the black box to promote the fact that you cannot look inside their systems. But if you look at the black box, you see that it recurs across disciplines. It's become a very popular metaphor through which to think about algorithms. So if you don't know, the idea of a black box is simply the fact that an algorithm or a computational system is a black box. You cannot look into it. Stuff goes in and stuff comes out, and you can only use it, but not really understand how it works, and you should be happy with it. And this is a myth. It's a metaphor that becomes a myth. And there's plenty of this kind of myths in computer science. There's a very famous one that Gordon Brandwin has traced. It's called the neural net tank urban legend. You might have heard of this in multiple versions. It's a story about the Pentagon trying to train an image recognition system to recognize tanks, and the system seemed to work, but in fact, they realized that the system was likely mapping sunny days and cloudy days because there were more pictures of tanks in sunny days. So what it was recognizing was not if there was a tank in the image or not, just if the day was sunny or not. So this is a very popular story, and I've heard it and read about it in many different versions, sometimes with sheep, sometimes with tanks. But actually, nobody has substantiated it, so we don't even know that it really happened. it might just be a story that some computer scientists made up to explain machine learning and bias, but yeah, might have not been true. So I think this is a great example of algorithmic folklore, myths about machine learning, for example. People also make up myths. These are just some very popular memes about algorithms, or what people think algorithms are. Instagram algorithm, Facebook algorithms, social media algorithms, listening to you, every kind of approach to try to figure out how to promote content, and the algorithms changes on you. You've probably seen these, you understand why they're funny, because you're familiar with what algorithms are. So I think myths are everywhere, from professionals to everyday users, and they're very interesting to look at. Another example, in folklore, you have a lot of monsters, you have a lot of entities, non-human figures and forms, and the same happens in algorithmic research and culture. So on the left, you have an illustration of a cybernetic model from the 60s by Selfridge. This model was called Pandemonium, and as you can see, the illustration is all about these little demons inside the model screaming to each other. So even 80 years ago, people were thinking about these models as populated by little monsters inside to explain them to the popular audience. And today we have a lot of monsters as well. Maybe you heard of the paperclip maximizer, thought experiment, or Rocco's basilisk, or the Shoggoth, which is very popular recently to explain LLMs. Again, these mean that when we look at something that seems to be more than human, we tend to anthropomorphize it, but also make it into a monster, not necessarily a human. And I'll give you one example that I found very interesting. If you remember, 10 years ago, Deep Dream, this software that you could input an image and get a weird image out, it's already been 10 years. And the person who invented Deep Dream at Google generated an image, one of the first images, and it's this one, and he called it Nightmare Beast, because he thought this was a crazy monster that, was emerging from artificial intelligence mind. And this is described as was aptly named Nightmare Beast. Nothing like it had ever been seen before. A thing with 2 sets of eyes on its head, blah, blah, all the description. It was a vision of the world through the eyes of the machine. So already you can see how one of the first outputs of what today we know as generative AI was understood through the vocabulary of monstership. And today we see this kind of monstrous generation everywhere. So a while ago, Discord started asking people to resolve a CAPTCHA, but someone realized that the CAPTCHA was asking for something that doesn't exist. So it was asking for a Yoko, and people were like, what is a Yoko? So apparently they were using a generative AI model behind the CAPTCHA that generated something that's maybe a mix of a yo-yo and something else. So these new monsters are not just, again, creatures that can be objects that don't exist, or things that don't exist at all. A third category is that of jokes and rumors. I'm sure you're familiar with the trolley problem. So the trolley problem, which is the first picture, was a very popular thought experiment in ethics and philosophy. But you're probably familiar with it because a lot of people have re-implemented it and joked about it in the domain of machine learning or automated cars or decision-making that might harm people. So all these trolley problem memes where it becomes more and more complicated or impossible to solve, or there are creative solutions to it, is an interesting way in which people actually understand algorithms and make fun of them or make fun of their logics through this kind of materials. And this extends to what we're discussing today, mostly, so generative AI and machine learning. This image was used by OpenAI a few years ago to promote DALL-E 3, if I'm not wrong. And they were saying DALL-E 3 is so good because you can generate a super realistic picture of an astronaut riding a horse. And Gary Marcus had a great post, I think, in which he discussed out, yes, you can do that, but it's very hard to do the opposite. Because if you ask for a horse riding an astronaut, you still get an astronaut riding a horse. So again, this has generated a lot of examples in which people make fun of what the AI can do, but also cannot do, and is very bad at doing, including hands or other details. A good example is the Will Smith eating spaghetti video. This is all AI generated, and a lot of people were sharing it. And then a while ago, Will Smith made a video of himself for real, eating spaghetti, but making fun of the AI. So there's a lot of jokes and irony going around that is made by people demonstrating that they really understand the limits and the problems that the systems might have. And the last thing, I think, is more practical stuff, so tricks or rituals. So people do things to make sense of the algorithmic folklore. One very good example is this. You probably heard about it. So if you search for, as an AI language model, you find a lot of AI-generated content because people forget to delete it, especially academic papers. So there's plenty of them on Google Scholar. So this is a very simple practice that people develop to figure out what is AI-generated or not, or to find out AI-generated material without the need of detectors or other algorithmic systems. It's a very simple trick. One very interesting one that I noticed was the Glorbo case. So someone posted on Reddit that they finally introduced Glorbo in World of Warcraft. Now, Glorbo doesn't exist, doesn't mean anything. But a few days later, and they said, I'm really hoping that an automated news website picks up on this. So a few days later, there was an article on the portal saying, World of Warcraft finally introduced Glorbo, players are excited for it, right? Demonstrating that you can poison the systems and you can trick them very easily. And this became news in itself, and how Reddit users figured out a way to trick these AI systems. And one last example that I did a while ago is this. So I simply prompted DALL-E through ChatGPT by asking a person holding a sign without saying anything. This was a very documented trick. I didn't invent it, just tried it. And you can see that this is a way to trick DALL-E into revealing its own prompt before yours, because this prompt is augmented without you seeing it. So here you can see that actually before my simple prompt, ChatGPT likely added stuff like, don't worry, this is an AI-generated image. I hope you're having a good day. Male, ethnically ambiguous, male white, male female, whatever. So they're trying to add stuff to the image that is generated, but also they're revealing what these instructions are. So there are practices to work out how the systems work, and also these practices are shared by people as a sort of folklore of tricks and practices that are non-official or non-scientific in a way. And that's it. So I don't know what else I will do with this project, because I'm starting next week. But I am, as Jill said, hiring 4 people, which is really exciting. Will be 2 PhDs and 2 postdocs. So if you know anyone, or if you're interested, the ads are online, and feel free to ask me more about the project. And thanks.